Today we are dining at Atelier in Ottawa, the capital city of Canada. This place did something that really pissed me off, so I'm going to leave a very critical review. The last time I was this angry at a restaurant was at a restaurant called 1742 Wine Bar in Manhattan. If you're curious, you can feel free to Google and read the review yourself. So the interior of Atelier is kind of like a silver gaudy type look. They do have sliding doors which do not close, so a lot of times the waiter and waitress tends to forget to close the door after they enter or exit the room, so there is an increased level of background noise. The first course is a bread and butter dish. The bread itself was beautifully executed. It's a Japanese milk bread. The only problem I have with the milk bread is there is an extra layer of butter, so your hands tend to be quite greasy afterwards. The butterflies visually are beautiful. It is a hard butter, so it does not spread. So a lot of times you're kind of just eating chunks of butter. The other places will do a whipped butter with different flavor combinations, and it's a lot more easy spreadable. The butter itself, the flavor was good, but I think a little bit more concentrated to really make the flavors stand out a little bit more. Our first dish is a dish called surface tension. It is basically a snow crab green curry. Visually it's very appealing. The styrofoam itself is a little bit sweet. There's a lot of different textures and layers, but everything is kind of stacked. So you're eating, and because it's such a big portion, you're constantly kind of looking around, digging around the items. So yeah, that could be fun. You're trying different combinations, but since it's a bigger portion, it becomes a little bit of a hassle. I find myself constantly looking for liquid because it was too dry. The reason they probably didn't put any liquid in there is because the styrofoam would have melted. I think a little bit more water rehydration into the level of the food will really bring the dish together. It's basically foie gras with a crispy focaccia bread. I don't really have any complaints. I think the flavor combinations were excellent. The only problem I have was just how to eat it. So you would basically have to take a spoon on a piece of bread and try to, go inside and scoop it out. And you kind of end up just keep digging and scraping this foie gras, and it becomes more of like a chore. The next dish is ash of score. Instead of crisping up the skin of the fish, they used a spring roll wrapper. The fish itself was cooked beautifully, and I really loved the little small slices of white grapes. It really brought out the flavors and brought everything together. But I find that the dish itself was so rich, I was digging constantly to look for the white grapes to really balance out the flavors. This next dish my wife hated, and for me I disliked the dish, but I'm probably biased on this dish because we're both not olive person, and the foam itself was also sambuca, so the black licorice and the briny taste just wasn't to our taste. The next dish itself, I really enjoy the flavors, the duck and everything. The presentation looks beautiful. So the problem with this dish is that it's a little bit on the higher, as you can see, it's elevated. So you're cutting, you're trying to cut the duck like you have T-Rex arms or something like that, and it's very difficult to cut. So you end up just chewing. You end up just eating the entire piece of duck. Thankfully, it wasn't too big. Ideally, I probably would like to cut smaller portions. So the problem with this dish is that the seaweed itself is too thick, and there's too much seaweed. So you're constantly ripping seaweed, and you're constantly chewing numerous times than I would like for this dish. So it kind of becomes a chore eating than it is more enjoyable. A lot of dishes should be easier to present and eat at the same time and really enjoy it, instead of me working for my food when I'm not supposed to. We have here a tiramisu cake. Nothing really kind of stood out here. Could use some stronger flavors. This last dish is probably my favorite dish of the entire course. It's basically a carrot cake with a coconut butter shell on top. The grand marinade, the raisins, the cherries, the walnuts, the miso meringue, everything was beautifully executed. This was my favorite dish of the night. The reason why I was so upset at this restaurant is because you're paying $250 for a meal per person, so it's $500. Next thing you know, they add a surprise mandatory 25% tip. So the problem we have is this is like, you're paying 25% extra when it's not listed anywhere. At least if you can list it on the website, then I can at least have the foresight, okay, I'm paying a little bit extra. But this tipping culture is basically insane. Why don't you just pay your employees a higher wage, charge me extra, and not include tips? I'd be more than happy to pay for that instead of adding an extra 25% tip. So now your $500 bill becomes a $700 bill, and it's just kind of like, what the hell just happened here? Granted, the service itself was excellent. I don't have any complaints, but that's kind of what you expect at a fine dining place. You're not expecting shitty service. But for them to charge that price is just unreasonable. I've been to places that have been ranked #1 restaurant in the world, #5 restaurants in the world, numerous fine dining places. I've never been charged a mandatory tip fee. For me, that left a very bad aftertaste in my mouth, and that made me angry. So overall, in terms of just, you know, if you were to rate this place with just flavors alone, I give this a 3.9 out of 5. But if you were to rate the overall experience with like how you kind of eat, it is more of a chore than it actually is more of an experimentation or interaction. You know, so there's some restaurants you go there, there's a little bit of interaction, but it's easier to eat. It's easier to, it's fun to eat. But here it becomes more of a chore, like the constant tearing of the seaweed, the constant excessive chewing of the seaweed, you know, it kind of takes away from the experience. You know, when you combine everything in the overall experience, I give this place a 2 out of 5. On my next video, I'm gonna show you something that's truly artistic, easier to eat, that actually thinks about the consumer on how it's consumed instead of something that just kind of force something on you. Let me know in the comments if there was ever an experience that you had at a restaurant that you absolutely just made you furious.